Hey, sorry I'm a little late for this one. In fact, I'm basically 2 days late. But the thing was, for this particular episode of Arrow, I actually kind of had to sleep on it. I actually had to take some time and consider whether or not I really liked it. And I'm pretty sure I've come to a definite conclusion. It's a mess. Now, it's an enjoyable mess, but it's a mess nevertheless. And what I mean by that is that I really think that this little mini trilogy of episodes, of Arrow episodes, dealing with Oliver potentially being dead and subsequently returning to Starling City. I honestly think that it should have been longer than 3 episodes, because this episode in particular, the other two didn't really suffer from this too much, but this episode in particular just packed so many plot lines and characters and seemingly unrelated scenes together, and again, it just felt like a mess. This episode was just kind of a train wreck at points, especially when it came to actually taking back the Glades from Brick. Now, first of all, I'll say what I liked about the episode. Well, it had a larger cast, which meant that I got to see some of these characters and actors that I've kind of been missing on this show thus far. For example, J.R. Ramirez comes back as Ted, and he doesn't get much to do because this episode is just full of stuff, but he comes back. He finally calls himself Wildcat, so I liked seeing him. And Sin, played again by Beck's Taylor-Klaus, she's still pretty likable and charismatic. I liked her a lot more than I thought I would, considering a lot of teen characters in movies, or at least as far as my experience goes, a lot of teenage or child characters in movies and TV shows are kind of obnoxious, especially when it comes to action-based ones like this. But hey, I liked Sin, and she's still fairly appealing. And in addition, the fact that this episode really focused on Malcolm more than anyone else. Now, if these creators are not careful, and I'm not saying that this episode completely avoided this, but if these writers and showrunners are not careful, then I think this could easily turn into a sort of Pirates of the Caribbean situation with Malcolm, in the sense that people might get the impression that you only brought him back because he was popular, which I don't want that to be the case, because I like the character of Malcolm, and John Barrowman plays him well, despite him bearing little physical resemblance to the Merlin from the comics, or at least to my knowledge. And this actually brings me to a much larger point, in that while this episode was unnecessarily packed with plot lines, and it was a mess, none of these plot lines were done particularly poorly. In fact, all of them were done reasonably well. I can't really think of one storyline that I completely hated. And probably the one that I was the most invested in was Malcolm. And the reason for that is that the flashbacks actually focused on him. We actually saw him 21 years ago, which if I had to nitpick something, I would say that John Barrowman, according to this, John Barrowman looked exactly the same 21 years ago as he does today, which, yeah, okay. I basically, all they did was give him longer hair. So, yeah, I don't think that was really fooling anyone, but yeah, this was fine. This was very, I actually was sort of compelled by what they were doing here with the Malcolm flashbacks, and how we really saw an interesting contrast between the sort of fun-loving dad, the dependable dad of the flashbacks, and the calculating killer of the present day segments. However, if I had to pick one thing that didn't work, and maybe I would have been able to digest this whole redemptive arc a little better had it been given more time to develop, but the fact that the episode, particularly towards the end, probably around the 2/3 mark, the fact that this episode expects me to actually like Malcolm, think Malcolm can potentially be a good person, even though he has killed hundreds of people, I don't know. And to be fair, it seems like what they were trying to do is he's still a psychopath. He is still completely twisted beyond any hope of full redemption, but really this episode seemed to be trying to tell me that he actually had at least a little bit of humanity left. And really that was the purpose of the flashback. So in that sense, it sort of worked, but in the same sense, if you follow me, I think it would have worked better had an entire episode been devoted to it, and had they not shoehorned it into, or not really shoehorned, had it not been mixed in with all the other plot lines, particularly trying to take the Glades back from the character of Brick, still played by Vinnie Jones, who again looks like he's having a lot of fun, and that fun translates out to the audience. And in addition, I liked Team Arrow's grappling over the decision of whether or not to trust Malcolm Merlyn, and I actually do think they made a pretty good decision in not to trust him. And particularly a line said by Diggle. He basically said, as soon as we let the end justify the means, that's just one step closer to becoming like you. So that was actually, those scenes were actually pretty poignant in all honesty. However, with the character of Oliver, now the build-up with Oliver actually trying to navigate through the forest with Tatsu and trying to get back to civilization, that was fine. I liked the conversations between him and Tatsu. Clearly, they've actually grown closer since the Hong Kong flashbacks. But the way that Oliver just randomly shows up at the end is, honestly, it felt kind of anticlimactic, because there's really no big return. There's nothing like that. He's just there at the end in the big battle to stop Malcolm from killing Brick. So that was a little disappointing, and how barely any time is devoted to actually coming to terms, to the other characters actually coming to terms with, hey, you're back, you're alive. We've spent the past month or so believing you were dead and really having to accept that, and now you're all of a sudden back. And again, this would have worked better. It still kind of works, at least in some scenes, but this would have worked better if an entire episode had been devoted to it. So in addition to that, I think what would have also been easier to swallow is Oliver suddenly deciding to work with Malcolm, because let's not forget, this is the guy who made his sister a target for the League of Assassins just to save his own skin, and killed hundreds of people in the Glades. And the fact that Oliver is just suddenly willing to trust this guy seemed a little far-fetched. It's an interesting direction that they're going in terms of, since Malcolm knows Ra's al Ghul's tactics, Oliver is basically allying with him out of convenience. So it's an interesting premise, but I just think that they could have introduced it better if they had given it a little more time to really marinate, if you follow me. But overall, the action scenes were pretty cool. We come to expect that on this show at this point. And the big battle, as much as was going on, I was entertained by the big battle, and it was especially so due to the fact that this type of scenario usually happens during a season finale on this show, because we usually have the large scale battle at the end of the season. This is just past the midway point. So the fact that they are seemingly pulling out all the stops halfway through actually has me kind of curious to see what they have planned for the end game. Although another plot line that, this is just kind of another random tangent, another plot line that I think would have been more effective is Sin sort of finding out that, hey, Sarah's back, but then discovering, oh wait, this is not Sarah, and subsequently informing the Detective Lance. That would have also worked had they given it more time, but again, I'm just sounding like a broken record here. I was entertained by this episode. In terms of storytelling, it definitely could have been a lot better. I felt like 3 episodes were packed into this one, but to be fair, those 3 episodes worth of material were fairly compelling, each in their own rights. And I'm still kind of on board with the direction that they seem to be going in for this season. So yeah, that's about all I got for this particular episode of Arrow, and until next week.